Good morning subscribers and welcome back once again. This video is for my Year 11 students. This is a feedback video for those of you who are studying GCSE Economics. And of course your homework, which was due in on Monday, was to complete question 1 of the Unit 1 paper from June 2018. And I'm just going to give you some feedback by way of video. And your homework, part of your homework for next week will be obviously to watch this video and to amend your answer script. So I have one in front of me here, which I'll just use as a little template as we go through. I'm not going to say a whole lot about the questions, just to point out the key areas where people were maybe going wrong or not answering the question or turning the question into something else entirely, which was not being asked for in the exam paper. So here we go. Question 1A simply asked you to name 2 functions of money other than the one that you're given, which is a standard of deferred payment or a means of deferred payment. Now that is simply a question of learn the functions of money. A medium of exchange, a unit of account, a store of value, and the one which you're given, a means of deferred payment. Nobody should be getting that wrong. Remember, the questions at the beginning of these scripts are written primarily so that the people who are going to score the grade E's and F's and U's, it's to give them access to some of the marks. Well, you do not want to be in that area, and neither should any of you. You're much more capable than that. So, learn them. There's no shortcut, you just got to learn it. 1B. Other than survival and customer service, state and explain 2 objectives of a company such as Neagle Carpets. So, for these objectives of firms, I'm not going to list a whole ream of them. So you could say, for example, they wish to maximise profit, they wish to increase their market share. But the key thing is, try to avoid one-word answers. So when it asks for objective 1 and objective 2, don't just put, as some people did, expand and leave it at that. Develop it just that little bit more than that. And then when it comes to the explanation, I've said here, ensure the explanation is just that. So make sure that you explain what you have identified as an objective. Make sure it's very clear. For some of you, your explanation bore no relation to the objective that you had identified. So make sure that that is clear. Okay, moving on, part C. Asked you to explain how scarce resources are allocated in a mixed economy. Now this is something which we covered last week when we looked at the product market. So those of you who didn't do so well in this, I refer you back to the notes and the diagram that we drew last week. Those of you who did well in this, you did refer to those notes and you did include the diagram, which is nice to see. So in a mixed economy, of course, we have the government, otherwise known as the public sector, allocating resources, and we have the private sector or individuals allocating resources based upon market forces, or as we would otherwise call it, DNS, demand and supply. So that's essential to answer this part of your question. A few nice phrases which I lifted out of a few scripts from a few people. So for example, Mr. J. Smith, he talked about the fact that the NHS healthcare is free at the point of use, and of course the public sector pumps money into the NHS, which we all consume, free at the point of access. Peace talked about the consumer being sovereign. So when the private sector, so when firms and individuals are deciding, do I produce, well, what could it be? It could be anything. Do I produce Jaffa cakes or do I produce midget gems? Well, they allocate resources based on where the demand is. And the consumer decides what is demanded, obviously. And then the firm just goes along with that. So the consumer is said to be sovereign over resource. They dictate where the resource goes. That's a nice phrase to use. And something which I didn't see, but you should have really mentioned, was the fact that in either circumstance, resources are scarce, choices have to be made, you generally can't provide everything, And so the thing that you give up, or the things that you give up, are known as the opportunity costs involved in a decision. So don't forget that. You could have included a diagram there, as I said. Really, it's probably easier to include a diagram, easier to get the analysis marks, I think. And then finally, part D. You had to evaluate the extent to which productivity is important. Now, most of you did the first half of this well, so the explaining of why productivity is important. You kept it in context, remember that phrase, answer in context, so carpet company. So you drew this diagram, shifted supply to the right, talked about the shift of supply, the expansion of demand, the reduction in price, the increase in quantity demanded and supplied. You did all that very well. Some of you even, which was tip-top, you talked about the fact that the demand curve in a competitive market where there are large numbers of substitutes means that the demand curve is relatively elastic. And you talked about the fact that you would lose what you would lose in revenue, which would be obviously that square rectangle, would be more than offset by what you gain. So you talked about the revenue implications, so that was good. However, some of you did start to bang on and on a bit about productivity, and you tried to turn it into an essay on specialisation, but it's not an essay on specialisation, so you've got to be careful. So really, you've got to avoid turning this into an essay on specialisation, and just talk about whether or not productivity would be the most important thing for a carpet company. This is where the context aspect is so important. So, if you, for example, you're too young obviously, but when you get your own house, if you try and get a carpet fitter, actually it's quite difficult to get a carpet fitter. So the number of people providing this service is relatively small actually. And so you need to think about what else would be important for the carpet fitter rather than just price. I mean, a carpet fitter, they're going to go on word of mouth, their customer service, the quality of the service they provide, whether or not they come back and remedy problems, all of that type of thing, be very important for a small, probably going to be sole trader type business. So you've got to then, when you're considering on the other hand, think about other things which might be more important than productivity. And those are the things which I've just mentioned. So I must say, ladies and gentlemen, start of year 11, I always think of economics as being a little bit like learning a language. And as you mature, you get better. And certainly having read these, I must say, it's very encouraging. The way in which, especially you're going about these extended answer questions for Part D, there's a real maturity about your work there. So this is great. And given that we're only in September of year 11, the outlook is good for the future ahead. So let's keep knuckle down on this. And I look forward to bringing you the next feedback video next week. Bonjour.